So welcome back. I trust that you have now gone on and completed the remainder of those tutorials. The remainder of those squares. I'm just going to save that and close it off. So we should have our first square complete. I'm just going to zoom in on this. What you will notice on mine is I've just quickly gone over and I've added some little dots into the mud in the background, just to add a little bit more detail. This was on my previous one. Also, what I have done is what was I going to say? So yeah, what I've also done is in these videos, the idea was to get you to get used to thinking about where the light goes, where the shade will go, and actually doing that manually. Now, what this creates is a very sort of very solid sort of bitty style graphics. Now this might not be the sort of visual style you are going for, and you may prefer to have something looking a little bit more realistic, and that's exactly what we're going to be looking at today with looking at water. So I'll just quickly show you what I have for that, which is this here. Okay, now as you may notice, the water is looking quite realistic. There's lots of tones, lots of fading in within the water, and you know, we don't really have that on this mud, and we don't really have it here where I've built in the mud to keep it matching up. Okay, but just one other thing. So if you have this stage already and you want to add a little bit more detail, I'm going to quickly demonstrate how we might do that. So rather than use the pencil tool, we may get the brush tool. Okay, create a new layer, and one of the things that I want you to think about is actually looking at the objects that we're sort of working on and making them more believable. So I don't want to zoom in where we've got the grid visible, because it tends to ruin our visibility on the effect. So stones, anything on the ground, tends to be might have a bit of moss and mould and things like that on, and they might also have a bit more sort of grey where they've been washed out. So we're going to add those sort of elements on. So I'm going to pick a real sort of musty green, something that isn't going to be too overpowering and really warm like we have up here, but something a bit more muted. And what we're going to do is just simply paint some of these stones with this on. Now obviously we've created these tiles, and you know, they probably won't match up perfectly, but providing we don't go over the top with the green, your audience shouldn't notice that aspect too much. Okay, and actually, as you can see now, we're starting to get a lot more realism and much more variation in the tone, and this actually allows it to, you know, start looking more realistic. Okay, so a little bit more worn. So I've got my green, my moss, so we'll just call that mould. Don't forget to stick it in your folder. And again, we're going to now just add a little bit more grey. So if our blue is around this colour, I want to get a little bit round here. Now what I tend to do is sort of try and bring it over the top of the where our light's reflecting off, just to sort of mute that out as well. Okay, and it will really sort of bring the overall atmosphere to our stones down, which is kind of cool. Now some of these what I've made previously are missing some of the highlights. Again, I can only apologise for that. I do actually have this on more updated on a file elsewhere, but I haven't copied that over for just now. So again, as long as we don't go too mad, we will keep the consistency, and even though it's not exact when they line up, they should still match without there being too much discrepancy. Okay, and now we can end up with something looking kind of cool, realistic, and well, not completely realistic obviously, but with a little bit more detail on what we had before. Okay, and actually when we look at it against the water, it's starting to feel like the more from the same place. So cool, just wanted to quickly show you that, and you know, really subtle. Rename your file, your layers, sorry, and we'll just call that pebble grey, just because it's a little bit more tone. We can put them in that folder, and again, so when we actually use the sprite sheet in, say, Game Maker, what you do is you tell Game Maker where to find an aspect on a sprite sheet. So you can tell it it's 16 by 16 and it's 0 at the top and 16 across, and it will pick out this part, and you can tell it to do that all the way through, and you can use that to draw your maps within the engine. So we're going to, as long as we work within the same parameters, we'll always be able to remember how to locate the parts we're working with. We'll go through that at a later date. So okay, we now want to start working on this. So in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to create the center tile for the water. Okay, so we're going to go File, we're going to go New, and we're going to create a new scene at 32 by 32 pixels again, and we're going to click OK. So Control 0 brings it full screen. Now, so what we're going to do is start with a neutral sort of colour. So create a new layer. We can probably just delete the background, to be honest, and we're going to select a sort of blue. We just want something in the middle. We don't want it too warm. We want it a little bit more natural, rather than like the photographs you see in holiday brochures, which are very that have had filters attached to them to look like really deep blue oceans. So we just want to find something a little bit more harmony. I'm being a bit too picky now. I mean, that will do. Okay, so we can fill our layer. I mean, we can just pick the bucket tool, just slam it down, and there we go. So again, probably looking a little bit like the ocean I want to avoid, but that's okay. So I mean, there's several ways we can do this. We could do this old sort of Pokemon technique, which I think sort of runs with the oh, let's just get it white, which sort of runs with a lot like a different shade, and it goes like this, and not exactly like that, but you get the idea. And basically I think it builds up in the middle, and builds and goes back out over different tones of blue going down, and I think they sort of go like this, or we might have like a couple of curves in, which match up, which line up, and that gets tiled over and over and over and over again, and is to give the impression that we have waves going diagonally down the screen, which is fine. If you want to go for that style, and using the tutorial that we've just gone through, find some other examples, see how they've done it, do that if that's what you want. But we want to go, but today we're going to use the brushes to try and get something a little bit more realistic. So simply what we're going to do is we're going to tile it again, but before we attempt to offset it, we actually need to add some detail in there to sort of make it look like it's back together. So if you go down to this one under the stamp tool, okay, which is the history brush tool, you should get a drop down menu. You should be able to go to your arrow, and if you go down to art brushes, I want you to select that. When it comes up, I want you to click add to selection. It will ask you if you want to append what you already have. You can append it if you want, which basically means it keeps the brushes you have already there. But this time, what I want you to do, once click OK, so once you've done that, and once it's done, I want you to select cotton balls. Okay, we can turn this right down. I mean, if we started doing that now, you can see how bright that is. It's just not going to work. So take that right down. Okay, even there, still too much. Right down. There we go. And we're starting to get a little bit more detail in there now. Okay. And what we're going to do is take that back on a new layer, and we're just going to build that on. Okay, so we've got something to tile. So what we're going to do now is just zoom out a little bit just to sort of see how that looks. Okay, and okay, it's looking kind of nice. It's looking like we've got some really intense reflections coming from the light above. And what we're going to do is we're going to offset that. We're just going to quickly rename our layers. So we'll just call that background water, something like that, background ocean, and then we're going to just put light. It doesn't really matter what it is, just as long as it's sort of as long as it's, you know, we can link it back to what we did. And we're going to go to other, filter, other, and offset. And now obviously this image is 32 by 32 pixels, so to halve it, half of 32 is 16, and I hate it when I apologise about that, just my pad goes into handwriting mode. There we go. So okay, so once we've got that, we can see it centered. Now all we're going to do again is with the cut balls is just go over it again. It's as simple as that. And then basically it will wash some of that out, those lines out, and again it will be seamless. Okay, so another one in there. What we're going to do is then go back to our brush tool, and we are literally just going to add a couple of strokes on, not that intense, so probably number 1. Okay, and actually what we can do is turn the opacity down there, probably to about 50%, I think. And what we're going to do is just paint some bits on to make it look like there is some form of water moving in there. Okay. Remember, the more identifiable the overall shape is, so the more obvious it is, the more easy your audience will pick up on the fact that it's tiled. And so we do want, although it's going to be obvious that it's tiled, we don't want to make it overly obvious. Well, I certainly don't at this stage. So change your section tool to 32 by 32. We'll just rename that and just call it highlights, not highlights but highlights. And then we're just going to push Control Shift C, which will copy the whole image with all the layers in rather than one layer at a time. And we'll go Control V, and then we have our first tile. Okay, so again, what I'd like you to do is, I'm missing my elements from there when I copied them in. That's because they're at the bottom here, look. So again, there we go. So once you've copied this over, we will be ready to start looking at how we're going to approach the sides and this sort of shadow underneath in the next tutorial. So carry on with that, and I will